Catalina Aircraft Company has engineered the amphibious multi-role Orcon to support Marine combat operations in aviation assault roles worldwide. Drawing on the historic legacy of amphibious aviation operations, the Catalina Orcon fills a key role of deploying and keeping Marines on mission. Designed for expanded O-line flight maintenance, the Catalina Orcon is built to sustain the amphibious advantage. Visit catalina-aircraft.com to learn more.
Hey Scuttlebutt listeners, welcome to episode 254. This week we welcome Stephen Camelio to the Scuttlebutt. Stephen is a screenwriter, storyteller, and content creator whose most recent project, Mending the Line, a story about a Marine embracing fly fishing to help him through post-traumatic growth, was the #1 movie on Netflix back in 2004. We interviewed the director of that film, Joshua Caldwell, back in episode 82. Please go back and check it out. Stephen comes to us on the cusp of another project, a story about Colonel John Ripley and his actions at the Dong Ha Bridge, based on the book The Easter Offensive. With Colonel Ripley being posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor back in June, and the Easter Offensive having been on the Commandant's professional reading list, it was great to get a perspective on this legendary Marine from a storyteller who hasn't been drinking the Marine Corps Kool-Aid his whole life. It was also interesting to hear about Stephen's background and how he came to be attracted to featuring Marine characters in his stories. This is episode 254. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Thank you for joining us and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with Nancy.
Hey, Vic. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. Doing pretty good.
We're going to talk movies today.
What's that?
I'm thinking about movies. We're going to talk movie kind of stuff today, right?
We're going to talk movies. We started talking movies even before we started recording with some He-Man sort of catching up for those, for while we're recording. But He-Man came out last week. It's a recent release, regardless,
Very recent release, yes.
Yeah. So, both of us being Gen Xers, He-Man was sort of always in the ecosystem of childhood development, for better, which explains a lot probably for where we are now. But yeah, we're going to talk some movies. We're going to go a little bit on our Wayback Machine in our own catalog. And then we've got an event that we're going to tonight.
Oh, that's right. Oh my gosh. How could I not even think that that's what we should be talking about right now? Yes, I'm super excited about tonight's event.
So we've got the Sunset Parade, again, through just probably something fell through the cracks with Sergeant Major Ruiz's staff, but we somehow got invited yet again to another Sunset Parade, which Max Iriarte is going to be the guest of honor.
Yes, I don't know what I'm more excited about, actually being able to meet Max in person. We did interview him on the show recently, or seeing the parade. And it looks like we're going to have great weather for it, and we'll have to post some pictures. We need to get some pictures posted on the Instagram.
It's an open bar too, so it's like win, and winning. Yeah.
And free parking.
Yes, free parking and all that good stuff. So, really excited. Love the Sunset Parade. It's one of Aiden's birthday events every year now. So we're coming up on the end of what he's dubbed his reign of terror. So this is one of the last events, and it's a good sort of culminating
very cool
thing for his season of birthday celebration.
Very cool. Well, we'll report back on that for our listeners after the fact, because it'll be cool.
Yeah, no, the Sunset Parades are great, and for our listeners who aren't aware, first off, correct yourself. But secondly, the Sunset Parades or evening parades, 8th and I, Silent Drill Team, and Drum and Bugle Corps come out.
Yes.
And do basically the same, very similar programming to what they would do at 8th and I, except they do it right there at the Iwo Jima Memorial. So,
and for more information,
very cool.
For more information about the Drum and Bugle Corps, shameless plug, check out the July issue of Leatherneck Magazine. The article about the Drum and Bugle Corps is our cover article this month. and we've got that
It's
article.
It's audio, Nancy. It's audio. It's
I know,
podcast.
but I'm showing you because I know it's an audio podcast.
For our listeners, Nancy just pulled out the cover of Leatherneck magazine to show me and Steve and our guest. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very proud of the cover.
It's a great segue to our guest.
Yeah.
So our guest today is Stephen Camelio, who was the writer of Mending the Line. And so for those who are familiar with our catalog, we interviewed the director of Mending the Line, Joshua Caldwell, for episode 82. So for those who are familiar, give it another listen. It's an amazing interview. And for those who haven't heard it, go back. Joshua is, just really a magnanimous person, wonderful director. And so that was a great conversation. So now we have the writer of Mending the Line. Stephen, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, this is really cool. I really appreciate you reaching out to us, actually, to kind of give us an update on what you guys got going on. And, a shameless plug, we just published in the Gazette an article about Colonel John Ripley and the Dong Ha Bridge. For those who aren't aware, Colonel Ripley has had his Navy Cross upgraded to Medal of Honor, and he will be receiving that this week or next week, the 18th, maybe. Google's not helping me out right now, but it's in the next few days. Will be the actual ceremony, and very exciting. And how Stephen came to us with is he's actually working on a project about Colonel Ripley, about the advisors and the CAP combat action program in Vietnam, and then the Dong Ha Bridge action in particular. So, Stephen, before we, I guess, jump into all, did I get that right, by the way? I make sure I didn't fuck that up.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
Okay.
I think we could chat about it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think about Stephen's story that's so interesting to me is that we were talking a little bit before we started recording that the Marine Corps was always something that was kind of on the horizon for you, but and fully understanding, you decided to pursue an athletic career instead of joining the Marine Corps, but then still have found your way. There have, the Lord has sort of led you into this world where now you are, a purveyor of Marine Corps mythology and heritage and legacy. How did that come to be? Like, what was it like? What was a young Stephen life like as you were staring down either, stepping on the yellow footprints or stepping on the bump in baseball?
Yeah. So my senior year of high school, I went to the career fair. In my high school, we had a big field house, and so everybody from around the surrounding towns would come, and they'd be probably hundreds at that point. I don't know if they still do that. They probably do it all online now, but you talk to someone from some school who, was either in the admissions office or a kid that went there, and there was a Marine recruiter there, and I just sort of gravitated, probably to the uniform.
Yeah, those blues, man.
Yeah.
And where was this, Stephen? Where did you grow up?
In Wilton, Connecticut.
Okay.
So I grew up in New England and bounced around a little bit, went to high school in Connecticut. And so we just got to chatting, gave me his card. He's like, give me a call if you're really interested. And I think I called him the next week, and we talked every month, I think, from there to graduation. And it was up in the air, what was I going to do? One of the two. And then I got kind of an offer to play Division I baseball at a school called Mount St. Mary's in Maryland. And
yeah,
my family was a big baseball family. My dad played at Villanova, and and it was sort of always a dream. I still had that kid's dream of playing in the major leagues, and
Dude, I
Sure.
still have it.
so I kind of took my shot. I did not like this. I didn't fit in well at the school, I'll say. I just spent a semester there. I transferred to Villanova middle of my freshman year. I went to play a little fall ball there, made the fall ball team, but I was behind at shortstop some kid who went on to play for the Cubs, and I kind of realized there was a difference. I was about 5'9", 160 pounds. This kid was about 6'2", 220,
Yeah.
and I kind of saw the writing on the wall, and that's, but where I my freshman year at Villanova, I did win a writing award, and it sort of spurred me on a different path. And I kind of lost sort of touch with those Marine Corps roots, but my uncle was he is a colonel, retired from the Marine Corps. My cousin is retired. He was in the State Department for a long time. So I still had those connections and always heard the stories. And then when my good buddy from high school went to Afghanistan, it kind of sort of reignited my interest in those stories and what he was doing. And then when he came back, he was the one who told me the story about Ripley and the bridge, and I just read everything I could about it, and I ended up with Jerry Turley's book, The Easter Offensive, which is pretty much why we're here today at talking to you guys.
That's awesome. And so you spent some time, though, cutting your teeth in journalism, though, right?
Yep. I started out in magazines, both in Boston and New York, sort of worked my way up from being a fact checker to an editor at InStyle magazine. And then I sort of parlayed that into freelance writing at various publications. I did a lot of book reviews for Publishers Weekly. Many of them were sort of military and adventure based. Wrote for a bunch of outdoor magazines, a lot of fly fishing magazines, which led me into Mending the Line later on.
Yeah.
So yeah, long time in that, and then some PR work. But I still write for various publications and stuff like that. I did an article for We Are the Mighty about the author Steve Ramirez, who's a Marine, who wrote the casting books, including the one that's in Mending the Line. So yeah, I try to keep my foot in that world. I think it's important to, especially nowadays, reporting and journalism is such a sort of.
So it's so different too.
Yeah.
Nancy came up as a journalist as well.
Yeah, I don't know what I am now, but
yeah, it's almost a non-existent field at least in the traditional sense. But there are still people doing good work and telling important stories, and I've sort of found my way to do that as as more as a screenwriter than as a journalist at this point.
And then, so you're sort of did you have any formal training, as it were, as a screenplay, to sort of get your screenplay credentials, or how was that transition for you going from journalism into screenplay writing? I got to imagine that there's not a lot of sort of analogous skill sets there, are there?
There are some, definitely writing and thrift. I think a lot of good journalism is, there are those great articles that are 5,000, 6,000 words, and, we remember those because they don't do them anymore really anywhere.
Right.
But, and newspaper journalism especially is, thrift, get to the point, quick sentences, quick, phrases, and that's very heavily involved in screenwriting. But I was working at InStyle magazine, and I had a good friend who was an actor in New York, Brian Blatstein, and he was not only doing, he was at the Stella Adler Theater, which is a very reputable acting theater where a lot of great actors have come out of. He was doing off-Broadway. He was doing all the shows that you do when you're a New York actor, Law and Order, CSI. I think CSI, I know he was on NYPD Blue because we loved it and he worked there. And this was sort of the time of Kevin Smith and Damon and Affleck writing their script and starring in it. So he was very like, you're a writer, I'm an actor. He's also a very good writer. And he said, let's write a script together. I'll star in it. You'll direct it. We'll be famous. So we had the best time of our lives. Like we had one computer, we'd hand it back and forth. And we'd meet in a bar and talk about the story and write stuff. And it was a lot of fun. And we actually wrote the script that, they always say don't show your first script to anyone, just throw it away and start over because it's terrible. But people really liked it. We got an agent. We thought we were going to sell it and all this stuff. We never ended up selling it. A friend of ours made it years later as sort of a very small independent film, but I got hooked on it. Yeah, it was fun. And it was, sort of a fun kind of that, guys, Wedding Crashers type story. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do. And I just got hooked on the format of I love that kind of writing real quick scenes and dialogue. And, I was a movie junkie growing up and I totally got hooked on the format. We wrote a couple others together that varying degrees of success. And then I moved to Montana and it became a little harder to trade a computer back and forth. And so I came here and I was working in Yellowstone, standing in a bookstore probably 6 hours a day. And that's where I wrote Mending the Line, standing at the counter.
Wow.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Wow. That is a very cool kind of origin story.
Yeah. And before, because I think that I want to talk a little bit about Mending the Line, just because obviously it was your first screenplay that made it into major motion picture circulation, right?
Yep.
So that, and just the fact that, it's, for those who aren't aware, Mending the Line focuses on a Marine who is struggling with PTS and finds therapy and recovery and growth through fly fishing. Really fantastic movie. Again, go back and listen to our conversation with Josh Caldwell. But one of the questions I have for you, though, sort of from a nerdy literary art perspective, is what was it like as a storyteller? You talked about, some of the parallels between journalism and screenplay writing is the thrift. One of the things I find really fascinating about screenplay writing, because I write fiction, and I'm, as I'm doing right now, overly verbose and do a lot of description, scene setting, world building is kind of my thing. You don't have that luxury with a screenplay, right? Because it's a minute per page is about what you're shooting for. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what they say. Yeah, it depends again on if you're writing action or dialogue or whatever, but that's kind of the standard. Yeah.
How is it for you as an artist to kind of relinquish some of that control to the other artists, the director, the actor, when you have a very, specific vision as you're putting it onto the page? You're not necessarily giving them a ton of prompts, right? You're not doing a lot of scene setting. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, there are important stuff you can get in there, but you're not saying what everyone's wearing. You're not, saying there's a Tiffany lamp on the table unless they're going to pick it up and smash it on someone's head. You just got to really hit the important stuff, and you got to trust the people who read it. The costumes, well, obviously starts with the director, and I was very fortunate, like you said, to work with Josh, but our whole team was great. Our art director Freddie, our costume designer Olivia, they knew, they could read it and understand. If you can present the character in a way, like there's one line you can say about a character and that tells you everything you need to know. Like you say, the kind of what your one description of somebody is, he's the kind of guy who wears a bow tie. Like that can tell you volumes about someone, right? You kind of get that idea of who this guy is just by that one.
Yes, for sure.
So you gotta trust them, and again, they did a all those people in our on that crew were just amazing, and they knew, they were all professionals. It was my first movie; it was not theirs. So they did a phenomenal job. So you got to kind of trust the process. It is a team effort, unlike a novel. And you gotta hand over the reins. And it was a very important, like, it was loosely based, or I guess not, more inspired by my dad, who was going through the VA system for cancer caused by Agent Orange exposure. And he had passed away before we shot it. So, it was very important to me to get the whole thing right. And again, living in Montana as a fly fisherman, it was, again, important to get those aspects right. But Josh is, a fly fisherman. We had a lot of involvement from the VA, from Warriors in Quiet Waters. We had veterans who were on set in the scenes. There's a very powerful group therapy scene, and the guy who tells the story, Saul Martinez, is a double amputee from Iraq. He basically told his own story. He's a phenomenal actor, but he almost played himself to a degree.
Yeah.
And we wanted that authenticity.
Well, man, I'm sorry to hear about your father's passing. But it's really great that there is that sort of there's a bit of your story that you're able to put into these stories that you're telling. And I think maybe that's probably where we get a lot of that texture in these stories, is that it's not just something that's coming out of the ether. It really makes it very relatable. One of the things that I find so interesting, and I was listening, kind of going to your point about being able to tell a lot about somebody in a short amount of time. I was listening to another podcast, and they were actually joking about this, but I thought it was a really sort of a rich exploration of sort of human characteristics and the things that we do that are silly but make for really great characters. Is they were talking about the difference between the candy cigarettes and an actual cigarette, and so this person always wanted to smoke, or always wanted to have like the accoutrement of a smoker, the cool lighter, the swagger, but didn't want to actually smoke themselves. And so I always thought that would be so funny to have a character who was like fixated on always having candy cigarettes. Anyhow, speaking of your dad, then, was that sort of like, I guess, what came first in the sort of chicken and the egg? Were you drawn to Marine Corps stories because of your family history, or was it the richness of the stories that just coincidentally happened to be about Marines?
I think there's a little of both. My dad was Army. He was communications. He was based in the Trang, but my uncle, we just called him the Colonel for growing up forever. He was typical, I mean, straight out of Central Casting Marine, tough, gruff, now with the gray goatee, and, he's mellowed a little at his old age, but, I remember him going off, to, San Diego or 21 Palms or wherever he would be off to, and doing his thing and coming back. And, and I remember my cousin going into the Marines and kind of hearing his stories when we both lived in New York at the same time when he was with the State Department. And, so he would tell me stories and stuff like that. And then when my friend, John Robinson, went to Afghanistan and the Middle East, it was just sort of the cumulative effect of these stories. And then as my dad got sick, I sort of got very interested in Vietnam. I always loved those movies, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, growing up, but I never kind of connected them to my dad, even though, like, we would grow up and we'd watch slideshows, and the Vietnam slides would always pop in of them at like China Beach and playing volleyball and the monkeys and stuff like that. And there were a few of the so they I think I got this correctly. They would put the radio towers on top of these sort of mountains and hills. They'd go in and Agent Orange drop it, denude these mountains, put a base or a communications tower on top of it, and then they'd fly back to Nha Trang, and then they go back out and maintain these communication things, and that was sort of his gig. So I remember seeing some of these. There were pictures of some of the top of the mountains that were just basically bare, and then they put the communication thing. So I had some connection to it, but when he got sick, I just started reading about the Vietnam War and the stories that you didn't kind of know.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had no idea that Jerry's book existed, and or my uncle's commanding officer, Andrew Finlayson. He's written 3 books, and I ended up reading those. And then my uncle would be like, "Oh, you should read, this one." So we always had like the Larry Burroughs coffee table photos of Vietnam book.
Mm-hmm.
As my dad got it, I think Christmas in the 80s or 90s, whenever it came out. And so I always seen that, but then I just got deeper into it. And then, I guess when that happens to your dad, you kind of just want to find out why he was there and what was actually going on and stuff like that.
And did you have the opportunity at all to ask your dad to share some of his experiences with you, or was he willing to do so?
Yeah, he would talk about it a little bit. I remember him saying it was the best and worst experience of his life. He volunteered he graduated from Villanova, and he basically just volunteered to go. He was a first generation American. He thought it was his duty, to this country to go and serve. And
Understand.
he did, went to OCS, and then did his tour of Vietnam. Was cut a little bit short because his mom got sick and he came home. And we have some of the recordings that he was sending back and forth between his family.
Oh, wow.
Kind of telling, oh my God, this country's beautiful. I've never seen water this blue. He grew up in Boston, in the city. He's like, these jungle, the trees are amazing and stuff like, just saying stuff like that. So that was kind of eye-opening. I remember my brother wrote a report, I think in the 8th grade. And he did talk to my brother sort of about the politics of all of it and stuff like that. But there wasn't a ton of it. We did, his best friend died in a helicopter crash, and he had babysat his daughter, I think when they were in OCS together. And so we went and met the widow and the daughter. She had sent to remarried. This was when I was in the 4th grade, and I just didn't understand, wait, how was this family put together if this guy died in Vietnam? But he had the kid just as he died. And then Brian Cox's character is named after him in the movie Mending the Line.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Echodyne's high-fidelity radars for maritime missions ensure expeditionary forces maintain decision advantage from shore to sea. Rapidly scale, evolve, and maneuver. Echodyne is trusted by defense organizations worldwide. Learn more at echodyne.com.
And now we're back. As we start looking at some of your future projects, were these, again, things that you've been drawn to, or is it almost like a field of dreams sort of thing? Like once you build it, they will come.
That's a good question. I think it's just finding as many stories as possible and kind of collect them to a degree, but you also have to make sure, if we get into talking about the Easter Offensive, there are probably 5 movies in this book. You could talk about, we're talking about Ripley and Turley. That's kind of the story that I focused on for the screenplay I've written based on Jerry's book. But you got Ray Smith, Navy Cross, one of the most decorated Marines since World War II. He's with Walt Boomer during the Easter Offensive. They're, making a run from it from, these two fire bases. James Joy is there, who is, goes on to be a commanding general. He's in Lebanon during the whole Beirut crisis. You got these two, I know we're talking about Marines, but you got these two Army advisors,
Right.
Camper and Brown, who are at Camp Carroll, which is one of the most famous sort of camps on the DMZ. They're kind of in this untenable position where the, South Vietnamese want to surrender, and they're like, we're not surrendering. And so they kind of have to find their way out of there, get on a helicopter. It gets shot up, it has to land, they get dropped off in the middle of nowhere, they got to get another ride. There's all these crazy stories that are already embedded. So you kind of, and there the Bat 21 story is in here a little bit, which has already been a movie with Gene Hackman in 1988. So you just look for the stories that speak to you and sort of pick them out. And I found the like I said, my buddy came back from Afghanistan. He's like, you got to read this book, and I was like, I was hooked. I've been hooked on it for years, and hopefully now with him getting the Medal of Honor, we can push it across the line.
Yeah, totally. And so for our listeners, so the book is called The Easter Offensive. Was on the Commandant's professional reading list for a long time. Didn't make it this year, but it is one of these books that is really, as we discussed, it centers on the Vietnam War. But I mean, as far as advising, embedding with host nation forces, in a lot of ways, fighting irregular warfare. It's a foundational book. It's really outstanding. But so you've got this book. The seeds of an idea have been planted. Like you said, there's like 5 different storylines you could choose from. What was it about the John Ripley story that you wanted to center your project on?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times in screenwriting and sort of movie storytelling, you got to kind of distill things down to one thing, and they always say, like, it's this impossible choice. And a lot of times they're talking about impossible choice is like, do you go after the girl or do you go after the job?
Right.
And you're caught in the middle, right? In a rock in the hard place. Or like, do you want to be popular or kind of be true to yourself, right? Like, and they're important stuff, but especially like, growing up, you got to make
the coming of age story.
Yeah. This story is basically, the rock in the hard place is, do you do your job and basically sacrifice your life, or do you go home to your family knowing that you're doing your duty to them, but you didn't really give it your all 100% to do this job that be a Marine. And he is caught in the middle of basically the hardest decision, live or die, basically. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you have Turley, the guy who's giving him kind of the order to do this, that he has to follow, is thrust into the untenable position of basically following orders or doing what's right, what is right. And so if people don't really understand the situation during this Easter offensive, basically the brass down in Saigon or Da Nang or wherever didn't believe that there were, 50,000 NVA crossing the DMZ. They said, telling him these reports are untrue. They would never do that. And he's like, I can see them. I got bombs coming. There are, Eisenstein, who was in the talk and then goes out to try to save some guys at a fire base. He's on a helicopter, and he's like, there are tanks in the open. That is sort of the, and nobody believes them. And, so that is just like, to me, that is just an incredible story of, and fortitude, not only physically to stand up to this, overwhelming invasion. They called it tech with tanks. But to do that, I mean, even more important than the physical aspect of all these bombs and tanks and, mortars they're facing is the personal and internal fortitude to stick to their guns and, stick to their training, stick to what it means to be a Marine. And I just thought it was just an overpowering story. And I think everybody who knows Ripley's story, sadly, it's usually only Marines that know it. But anybody who knows that, they're just like, oh, Colonel Ripley, like, unbelievable. It's the most important, maybe not the most important story in the Marine Corps, but, top 5 and one of the most impressive courage under fire stories in American military history, if not, the entire history of modern warfare.
So you were mentioning a little bit before we started recording, being in touch with Ripley's son. Have you been able to get a sense of what kind of person Ripley was besides this amazingly heroic action of his at the Dongha Bridge?
Yeah. So I've been in contact with Tom and Stephen Ripley. They've read what I've written and contributed, the stories that have been passed down from their dad or that they know. And just a guy who, I mean, also a great father is kind of what they kind of say, and they both served in the Marine Corps. So it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, I think, but, built kids that are strong and independent and dependable and, faithful. And, he was very attached to his Catholic faith. And he was very, I'm trying to think of the word, well, not only faithful to his wife, but respectful of her and her position in the family and dependent on her strength. I think, he was a very strong person, had very strong opinions. And, she was sort of the backbone of that family. The part of the story that I'm telling is, she's home with three kids, I want to say under 5.
Wow.
And, it weighed heavily on him, but he also knew that she could handle it,
Yeah.
So, just you can Google Tom's eulogy, and it kind of sets up what he meant to them and as a father and as a family member, but also as a Marine, and I think they were all, you couldn't separate one from the other, and I think you get that in the story as well.
Yeah, that's so gnarly. I guess going back to your comment about like these impossible decisions, I was fortunate in all of my deployments to not have, little ones or significant others. I proposed to my wife on furlough when I was in Afghanistan, but the stakes were just not. I just couldn't imagine being faced with that kind of decision. When you've got 3 little ones under 5, the weight of something like that, it seems, like you said, it's impossible decisions. I can't imagine that. I've seen, even in, less stressful environments, Marines change when you do have, when you're single, your hair's on fire and you really, mission accomplishment is about all it is. But when you've got something back home, it does change the calculus for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a I mean, there's some interesting things about Jerry's book that jumped out to me the first time I read it, and one of them is that he changed the names of some of the people he served with because of exactly that. They just cracked, and they didn't either hold up their training didn't hold up, or just physically or mentally they cracked. And there's kind of a little story running through the talk of this guy who just wants to get out of there, and Turley won't let him. He's like, you're important to this mission and you'll stay. I believe he was Air Force, but that kind of idea remains. But on top of that, like we're talking about the kind of the life and death stakes of all of this. And another thing that has always kind of, I guess, endeared me to the Marines is the gallows humor and the ability to joke through the most painful or dire situations. And Jerry, like, you read a lot of these books and it's like very, I don't know, strict and proper, and nobody wants to say anything out of turn or anything like that. But this book is full of humorous asides. It is and getting into the story of Ripley at the bridge. He's with a tanker named Jim Smock, who is Army, and the two of them are under this bridge together. And the whole time they are cracking jokes at each other. There's an inter-service rivalry banter going on. Like, there's gallows humor, and Jerry puts it all, in the book. And even Jerry talking about his own, like, predicament. He takes it very seriously, but he also is there, he's not afraid to crack jokes or be funny or kind of bring you into the story. And I think that's what sets this, story and how he's written it apart from a lot of these kind of quote unquote history books or whatever you want to call them. I mean, he says, and I think the first sentence of the forward, I was here by accident, and he wasn't even supposed to be there.
Yeah.
He wasn't supposed to take charge. He wasn't even in the chain of command, and they just kind of dumped it on him.
Yeah, because he's the advisor. I mean, he's not, like you said, he's not even in the chain of command. He's there advising the South Vietnamese Marine. They were South Vietnamese Marines, right?
And he wasn't really advising at that point. He was getting acquainted. He was on basically a fact-finding mission to basically find out what his job was. He had just gotten back in country. He says, I was there to get acquainted. And then he ends up with, quote unquote, skeleton crew in the talk. And, the guy, the general, I think is a guy or Guy, he was going on holiday while his troops were rotating, which Jerry says, mentions as like one of the most difficult maneuvers. Right. And he went on vacation and, left all these people handing the bag. And then the bag gets passed down and down and down until it ends up in Jerry's hands. And he's got no one to pass it to. And he has to kind of take the baton.
Man. That's gnarly. So where are you at in the process of this project?
Yeah, so I got a finished script. I'm kind of taking it out to various people, trying to find someone who's interested in either buying it or making it or being a part of it. There's obviously certain actors that kind of looking forward to play someone like Ripley. I mean, it can't just be any Joe Schmo off the street.
Sure.
It's got to be someone who's got some gravitas, some weight, not only in the industry, but with audiences. I would not do that to the Ripley family to, have it be second rate. So I've had offers to have other people do it at a price point that would not have made it what it should be. So just finding that right partnership, and get it across the line. And I think, now with him getting the Medal of Honor, I think he'll get a little more recognition, a little name recognition. And I think it will get some of these people involved.
Yeah. I mean, I 100% agree, and I've obviously, a heavily biased opinion about this as a, Marine myself, but it seems like this would be a slam dunk. But yeah, I know, as we were talking before we started recording, that every organization has their layers of bureaucracy, and hand wringing and gripping and grinning that has to go on to make a project like this come to life. But with you essentially having at least the story part of the creative part of it done, what were some of the things that you learned as you're coming into the project? I mean, you're doing a much deeper dive than even what the book was doing. So I guess creatively, what were some of the things that you learned? What are some of the things that surprised you about this story as you were, essentially putting it together?
Yeah, I mean, I went through after action reports and statements from Ripley and Smock that they gave, post the bridge. Turley gave his own statements. He's got all his research and files and stuff like that. I guess that's a good question. A lot of it is covered in Jerry's book, but I think the personal aspect and I think that was more from speaking to, Smock's son, the Ripley sons, just about the guys, the personal connection that they had. Even Ben, who is the leader of the unit that the soybean bien, so I'm pronouncing it wrong, Marines that Ripley is an advisor to and embedded with. Ben is like this, inscrutable gunslinger character. Like, these guys, for all the great work that the American advisors did, they were there for a year, usually with these units. This guy was fighting for 13, 14 years, pretty much nonstop, and with his group of Marines. And again, I didn't know, and Jerry does give them service, the Vietnamese Marines that were basically created by the U.S. Marine Corps. How great of a military unit they were, and I didn't really know that before going in. And then I did a deeper dive into that. There's a couple books that are just about the Vietnamese Marines, and then what happened to them afterwards. A lot of them were, if they were caught, in Vietnam, they were tortured. Many of them killed. Ben was tortured for a very long time in country before he got to the United States, and then ended up living here for a long time, which I didn't realize. I wish I had known earlier, because I missed him. He passed, I want to say, in 22. And I wish I had the chance to, obviously, to talk to him.
Sure.
It would have been,
that would have been amazing.
Yeah, and I know there were a couple books written, and that the authors did get a chance to talk to him while he was in the United States, and he told a little bit of his story, but he still remains sort of an inscrutable character, which is great for my part, because I think it makes him more powerful in the story. But I would have loved to know more, and what was going through his head and all that.
Well, it's definitely one of the things about the book that I find is really refreshing. As a Vietnamese American, to have more, I think in a lot of ways the South Vietnamese military, for all of its flaws, was kind of seen in a very two-dimensional way. Like, oh, these guys don't really want to fight that hard. It's the NVA who are the real fighters. And so it was good to see a more dynamic view of who the Vietnamese were, who did, like you said, risked a lot to, side with the Marines to become Marines themselves. And, you know, in talking to even my boys about sort of the history of Vietnam, I mean, if you go back to the Viet Minh, World War II, I mean, these folks have been at war essentially for generations. You know, getting out the Japanese, then getting out the French, and then dealing with the Americans, and dealing with the Chinese. It was one thing after another after another. So to see that more human aspect of it, I think, is really great. Um, it really adds a dynamic to the story that I think you don't see in a lot of other um, memoir or history accounts, because like you were saying, a lot of it is very sterile. Hey, here's what happened on this date with these amount of people. And the other ones are, hey, here was my, you know, sort of my personal experience, which is great. But we sort of take that personal experience and then try to magnify it into, oh, well, this sort of encapsulates the entire war. I don't know. I'm rambling.
No, I think you have a great point. And I just had a call with a producer, and he's like, well, for me, as much as like, I love the Smock Ripley dynamic. I love the Turley Ripley dynamic, the Turley dealing with the brass, dynamic. There's all sort of conflict but he's like, for me, the heart of this movie is Ben and Ripley, two guys from opposite sides of the world thrown together, trying to do this one thing, impossible thing. And, they barely speak the same language, but they speak a different language of, Marines.
Right.
And I think, they don't say a ton to each other in the script, and they don't, it's not, like I said, sunshines and rainbow, but at the heart of it, it's these two guys, very different, but they're both Marines, and they kind of carry it in their heart, and you can kind of see that connection there. And I think it's very important. It was very important for me to make sure that the Vietnamese were represented in a way you kind of haven't never seen, like you said, never seen in in one of these Vietnam movies. And this is not one of those Vietnam movies. There were only 250 Marines in country at the time this happened.
Yeah. I mean, this is 1972. We kind of we're dialing it in at this point.
Yeah. So it's not going to be like, 20 Johnny Depps, all together. You get two Americans basically in the field. Everybody else is pretty much Vietnamese. And then the guy in the talk, you got a mix of, which is another nice thing. You got a mix of Vietnamese and Americans sort of having to get this thing done. Kind of left out, hung out to dry.
Ripley's story is so compelling, and I remember shortly after I came to Leatherneck, we published an article about Colonel Ripley, and I remember I was pretty new to the magazine at the time, and so I was still learning a lot about the Marine Corps, but that story jumped out at me immediately, and it has stuck with me ever since. I wonder what your thoughts are. Why hasn't anybody ever made a movie about this before?
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough call. I know that they tried. There's some papers in Turley's sort of historical record that, he gave someone the option. They tried to get something off the ground. It never happened. I don't know if people thought with Platoon and Full Metal Jacket, which are just phenomenal films, that the Vietnam War was done. It was done really well. Let's kind of move on. And then nowadays, I mean, we were talking about movies at the beginning. You're either getting $100 million spectacles, Masters of the Universe type things, or you're getting very small horror films that have a chance to break out and make a lot of money. But you don't see, like we talked about Bat 21, that was a great movie, 1988, probably made for that mid-range, $30-50 million, 25 probably maybe back then. They don't make those movies anymore, and they haven't for 20 years. They haven't made sort of mid-level movies. And I think that's where this is. This isn't Saving Private Ryan, you know. It's less epic and more kind of 90 pages of your foot's on the gas. You know, it's more like an action movie like that. Like just, and I just think, yeah, they don't really make it. And you kind of need a movie star. And back, you know, in the 80s, there were a lot of them. 90s, there were fewer. Now you got a handful of kind of movie stars that can pull off one of these kind of roles that are, you know, like we talked about, gravitas, not only for the character they're playing, but for the audience, and you know, and can inhabit a character like this. And it's not easy. But there are a few of them, and we're gonna find them.
Man, that's such a good point. It's something I never really even consider, is that idea that everything has to be like an epic. Or it's just so human interest related that there's not really much of a setting. It's just, you know, just two people in a diner talking. And so, yeah, there isn't that in between where, hey, there was this one really great event that had all of the ingredients that you need, but it's just the event that we're going to focus on. And everybody else wants to, well, let's bring in all these other aspects of it. And then it overinflates and then becomes untenable.
Yeah, and I think The Outpost is a good benchmark. You know, I don't know if you saw that.
Is that
film.
The one with Orlando Bloom?
Yep.
Okay.
And you know, they kind of focus on this one event, and it, you know, was very powerful. Was not, you know, a break your bank kind of budget. It was done very accurately from what I've been told, you know, from folks in the Marine Corps, and you know, it was done with care for the true story and the characters, you know, many of which, again, like Ripley, have gone on to get you know, very high commanding awards. So through a recognition through the military. So I think it can be done. It's just, again, finding the right people and to shepherd it through and who want to do it right.
Well, I'm really excited by this project, man. I'm just, I for what it's worth, man, you got the Scuttlebutt seal of approval. We're gonna try to help you push this thing over the finish line. But you have another project that I wanted to talk about too. Is we're talking about Marines and sort of, you know, you being this, you know, Marine magnets for really great compelling stories. This other one you're working on, could you tell us a little bit about that? I know it's kind of it's just in its infant stages.
Well, so I in terms of Marine stories, I have a TV pilot based on the book Killer Kane, which I don't believe has been on the Commandant's list, but it's a great story by a guy we talked about, Andrew Phillison, and he was my uncle's commanding officer in Vietnam, and he was running a LRP unit basically called Killer Kane. You know, they were, I think, the most decorated recon unit in the Marine Corps, in Marine Corps history. They were at the time. I'm not sure if they still are. They basically would get dropped out into the middle of nowhere and you know, 8 guys against whoever they met up against, and then they get picked up 3 days later and come back. And you know, just his writing about what it was like to be in the field, and you know, sneaking through elephant grass and through the jungle and setting up ambushes, and then, you know, sometimes they just come across a whole unit and basically have to fight their way out and get extracted. And so the pilot kind of focuses on this group of guys, Killer Kane, you know, all different guys, you know, more the classic Vietnam story, you know, the country guy, the surfer, the black guy, you know, the smart guy, the dumb, you know, guy, the drunk, and kind of how together they became this incredible unit. And then, so Andrew would go on and come back to Washington and work in the White House this is the end of the 60s. So I just thought it's a really compelling story, of sort of you get the whole sort of feeling of the 60s in Vietnam through this one guy's eyes. So yeah, that's a TV pilot. I've been kind of shopping around, and another Marine story I've been working on is the story of Chu En Lee, the first Chinese American Marine Corps officer who served.
Yeah, I think he was actually the first Asian commissioned officer in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, that's probably
Yeah.
true. And this was during the Korean War, and he was at the Chosin Reservoir. So he was Chinese American, grew up as a, first generation American. His parents spoke Chinese, and he fought the Chinese at, Chosin in Korea, which is just a really not only that, I mean, that's a compelling story in itself, but his actions were very heroic. He
Navy Cross recipient, right?
Yep, a bunch of field commissions and stuff like that, and just the actions he undertook and the team he led was just incredible. So, trying to get that story off the ground. I've spoken to his daughter, connected with some of his family members. Again, lots of after action and digging through old dusty books. Luckily he told his story a couple places that I've been able to find. Yeah, I'd love to tell these stories. I've made strong connections with the Marine Corps Entertainment Liaison Office. Those guys have been great to me. They supported my projects, and they worked on Mending the Line, and hopefully we get to work with them again.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
cool.
The story of Chu En Lee I think is hilarious. Is when he basically comes upon a Chinese unit, and obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but like, he then starts speaking Chinese to them, which allows him to essentially infiltrate, and then he just basically ambushes them by himself, right?
Yeah, he was sort of he kind of went off on his own. I mean, the whole unit had been ambushed or almost decimated in the middle of the night, and he kind of broke out on his own. And yeah, that's pretty much the story. And and that's just sort of one part of to what he gets wounded there, escapes the field hospital to get back to his unit, and then just performs a heroic rescue mission at the Chosin Reservoir, and volunteers to lead it. And just, I mean, we're talking about if not the worst conditions, the U.S. military has faced, in terms of winter. Maybe Bastogne competes, but and sadly, again, talking about not being able to speak to people, these guys from Korea are pretty much gone. They're really hard to find, especially, the early guys that were first there. I've been able to talk to a few people who served with him, and but anyone who's been at Chosin, the stories they tell are just, it's almost unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
The conditions that they faced, and just what they did. And I really think those guys, much as with my dad being a Vietnam vet, and my buddy, my cousin being in the Middle East and stuff like that, those Korean guys, and you see all these movies about World War II, but those guys that were in Korea, man, what badasses.
Yeah.
People don't know. Yeah.
Crazy.
And so important to tell these stories so that they're not forgotten. And so, greatly appreciate you doing that, telling those great stories.
Well, I hope I have the opportunity to do that, and it's an honor to do so. And not being able to speak, I've got to speak to Jerry. He's kind of being in so many war zones. His hearing's wasn't so great. I used to talk to his wife, who sadly passed away, but never got a chance to talk to Ripley, or Chu En Lee, obviously. But an honor to be able to talk to their families and hear their stories, and Jim Smock as well. So I hope to do them justice.
Man, well, you're doing great work, and like just to echo what Nancy said, I mean, thank you so much for taking this baton and continuing to run with it. And yeah, we're really just very excited for what you've got going on down the pike, and let's get you back on as some of these things start to materialize and actually turn into things, and so we can help get the word out and just sort of see how you're doing and how everything's going, man. So, but thank you so much for this, and thank you for taking the time this morning to spend with us.
Well, thank you guys, and thanks for the commandant list that you guys have been doing. It's given me, that I try to get to as many as I can, but I obviously don't know about a lot of them, and for sharing these stories, and you guys are doing the same and making sure people know about them, and I appreciate it. And I reached out about some of your recent episodes that about the films that you guys were talking about, and just so powerful, and some of them I didn't even know about, and just the chance to see them was just amazing. So I appreciate what you guys are doing, and definitely look forward for talking again.
Thanks, awesome. Man. Well, yeah, keep that up, man. You're guaranteed to come back on the show.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm taking some notes, so we're good.
All right, Stephen, man, have a wonderful day.
You too. Thanks, guys.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.